Okay, and here I have to check just 1 second. Okay, so okay, AP panelist Zoom. Okay, let me see here why. Battery, Bluetooth, OBS. I think that I have to be connected again, but by Zoom. Let me just check something. This is really strange because I have my camera, but control battery, Wi-Fi, desktop application, OBS, Mac, property Zoom, Spotlight, Telegram, VPN, WeChat, server. No. I have a problem with the Zoom. Okay.
David, David, can you
Yeah.
can Okay. Yes, and then I have suggestion that we may have another choice that is to make a recording, and then after the event, and then we can upload it to the cloud.
Yeah, we can try to make that, because here I have the problem with the Zoom, and
Okay.
because the Zoom is not connected, I can't make the connection between the Zoom and the YouTube, with the
And
stream.
here, on my side, we make a recording via Zoom, and maybe we can share with each other about
Okay.
a recording. Yeah.
Okay. Great. We can make that. Um, so you tell me just when we can start, and not more.
Now it's under recording.
Okay, great. I will start right now. Um, so, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are watching us at this moment. I'm David Lopez, and I represent the International Association for Human Rights and Social Development, IDES. Today, we are gathered for a highly relevant event that will lead us to explore a fundamental issue in the international community: human rights and their evolution in the context of what some have called the human rights industry. In a world that has gone through conflicts, challenges, and advances, human rights have become a pillar of the global community. From the creation of the United Nations to the promulgation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there has been a tireless struggle to promote and protect the fundamental rights and freedom of all people. However, in the process, these noble goals have become politicized and at times used as a geopolitical tools. Today, or even focuses on a case research that shed light on this complex issue. The book, The Human Rights Industry, by Professor Alfred de Zayas, the creator of the 25 Principles of a United Nations International Order. That books represent a thorough and honest assessment and critique of how international institutions charged with overseeing respect for the principles of justice and the rules of law have developed around the world. Professor Alfred de Zayas, with his vast experience and authenticity, provide us with an unique opportunity to understand the often hidden procedures and mechanisms by which these institutions exercise their mandates. However, it's important to mention that Professor Alfred de Zayas has faced unexpected challenges along the way, recalling the words of great thinkers in the social science and philosophy, who have at times faced resistance to truth. In an unfortunate twist, Professor de Zayas has been confronted with obstacles that some have considered unfair and, in some cases, almost illegal. His work has been blocked by the United Nations, and he has faced resistance from various media outlets that are perhaps challenged by the truth, by truths he presents in his book and by his works as an independent UN expert. Despite these challenges, Professor de Zayas continues his valuable works in the field of human rights, demonstrating the importance of persevering in the search for truth and justice in our ever changing world. Today, join us in this conversation. We are privileged to have a panel of internationally renowned experts, each with a unique perspective on the subject. Dr. Muhammad Ali, a respected academic of former BBC editor, whose global view will shed light on the challenges and opportunities in the field of human rights. Mr. Shakel Rami, CEO of the Asian Institute of Eco-Civilization Research and Development in Pakistan, who will offer a perspective from Asia and the developing world. Dr. Tian Li, Director General of the Center for Human Rights and Pacific Development at the Global Governance Institute, providing legal and human rights expertise. Dr. Gabriel Aguirre, War Beyond War staff in Colombia and Venezuela, who will share his vision from the Latin American context. Gustavo Ng, editor-in-chief of Dangdai magazine in Argentina, offering observation from the media's field. And Lobsang Dorji, program manager for education reform in Bhutan, whose perspective on education and social development will be central to our discussion. And as an additional honor, we will have the pleasure of having the creator of the book and author of the 25 Principles of United Nations International Order, the former independent expert and professor of the Graduate Institute of Geneva, Professor Alfred de Zayas. Today, together, we will unravel the complex landscape of the human rights industry and explore how this phenomenon has impacted the promotion and protection of fundamental rights on the international stage. Without further ado, we welcome you all to this highly relevant event and begin this exciting conversation. Together, we will unravel the complex landscape of the human rights industry and explore how this phenomenon has impacted the promotion and protection of fundamental rights in the international arena. Without further ado, welcome all again to this highly relevant event and begin this exciting conversation. So, Professor Alfred de Zayas, buenas tardes.
Muy buenas tardes.
For this time, we will talk in English, and sorry for my English, it's not the best. I will give you the floor to open this exciting and important event. So you have the floor there, Professor.
With pleasure and many thanks for organizing this. David, Gustavo, Dr. Ali, Dr. Rame, Dr. Aguirre, Dr. Tian. I've spent 50 years of my life working in various capacities for human rights as a young activist, as a consultant, a lawyer, young lawyer with the United Nations, then Secretary of the Human Rights Committee, senior lawyer and chief of the Petitions Department, independent expert, consultant, and as president of non-governmental organizations. I was president of the PEN International Center Suisse Romand, which is the French-Swiss PEN. Also had the opportunity of being the coordinator of all the PEN centers in Switzerland on 3 occasions. I was president for 7 years. Right now, I am the delegate for writers for Peace Committee. As the case may be, last week we had a meeting of the Writers for Peace Committee in preparation of our annual meeting next week for PEN International. And I just flew back from Vienna, where we had a lovely conference on the very important issue of responsibility of states. And of course, everybody knows responsibility to protect, but it's a question of priorities. I mean, what's most important is the responsibility to protect all of us from war and protect all of us from the escalation, from the madness that is going on. So I do not at all regret the 50 years that I've spent in the field. I consider myself privileged that I was able to serve in some way. And my various books. I've written a total of 12 books. And the one book we're presenting now is this one. We're presenting the human rights industry. And you see, and if you remember Charlie Chaplin's film Modern Times, the wheels. And the wheels turn, and here you have the World Economic Forum and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and NATO and the United States, and all the wheels are connected with each other. So you understand what that cover is supposed to convey to it, that the system has been hijacked. When I entered the system back in 1980, with Theo van Boven, who interviewed me and hired me into the office of what was then the Division on Human Rights, we were a very small team, but we were very committed and we meant it. By now, the penetration of the private sector, of transnational corporations, of the donors. You see, the donors set the agenda. That's part of the problem. You know, when you're no longer independent, you don't get funds you need from the United Nations, from the Fifth Committee, and you have to depend on voluntary funds. It's quite clear that the donors set the agenda. And that has led, of course, to a high level of politicization. Of course, the Human Rights Council is political. It would be silly to expect it not to be political. The Security Council is political, the General Assembly is political. Well, obviously, the former Commission on Human Rights was political, but the Human Rights Council actually is worse. And I mean, the level of hypocrisy, double standards, etc., that you witness every day. Right now, there's the 54th session of the council. I've already been on 4 separate side events. The Human Rights Council, which should be the forum for constructive debate, the forum to formulate pragmatic strategies, how to solve the problems, especially how to prevent violations of human rights. It's become an arena of gladiators. I mean, they're throwing knives at each other. And the name of the game is what is termed naming and shaming. So instead of formulating preventive measures so that you don't have to put band-aids here and band-aids there, all they do is to condemn. And it's quite funny to see some states that have a horrendous record of human rights violations, including my own country, the United States of America, or for that matter, the United Kingdom, with its horrendous record of abuses in India and elsewhere during colonialism, or France and Germany, etc., etc. They are the first who are just pointing fingers at others. And that's something that I think is retrogression in human rights terms. But again, we mentioned this book. I wanted to highlight the fact that I have dedicated this book to 30 whistleblowers that I name individually, and I say what they have done. Obviously, everybody knows Julian Assange, everybody knows Edward Snowden, but not everybody knows Jeffrey Sterling and the others that I name. And I think these people are true human rights defenders. Not the human rights defenders that very frequently are named in United Nations documents. The choice of who is a human rights defender, it's something that has always upset me because it is a prime example of double standards. Genuine human rights defenders are actually defamed in the Human Rights Council, are actually denigrated in the Human Rights Council, and people who are in the service of the geopolitical interests of Washington and Brussels are lauded and hailed as genuine human rights defenders. Now, this book is actually the third in a trilogy. In 2021, 2 years ago, this book came out, Building a Just World Order. Building a Just World Order is based on my 14 reports to the Human Rights Council and to the General Assembly, which include, of course, the 25 principles of international order. But of course, I address the World Bank and human rights, the IMF and its loan conditionalities, how they actually are at loggerheads with the objects and purposes of the United Nations. How instead of advancing human rights, in many cases, they destroy the environment, they lead to privatization of social services, they lead to the abolition of social services, they lead to the dismissal of half of the civil service, et cetera, et cetera. The IMF has been very, very damaging in human rights terms. All of that is explained in the first book. The second book in the trilogy, Countering Mainstream Narratives, deals mostly with the problem of information, the information war, and whom can we believe? I mean, I used to be a believer. I mean, I used to be, and I still am, a daily reader of the New York Times, not because I think the New York Times is a good newspaper, but because I think that the New York Times is an influential newspaper. And I have to know how they're influencing people. The fact is, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, die Neue Zürcher Zeitung, BBC, the Times, etc. They're all homologated, what the Germans call gleichgeschaltet, and they are indoctrinated people into a particular narrative. And that narrative, unfortunately, is false. Most of the time, that narrative is not advancing human rights, is not conducive to peace. And as I said, priorities are important. And the priorities of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights are wrong. The priorities of the Human Rights Council are wrong. I mean, the first and overarching principle is Pax Optima Rerum. Peace is the highest good. And when I see Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch advocating actually the use of force, they're advocating unilateral coercive measures, which everybody knows are illegal. You know, UCMs are not sanctions. The only legal sanctions are those imposed by the Security Council under Chapter 7. Everything else is a unilateral use of force. And you know, use of force is prohibited in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. Now, people will say, oh, no, but they meant only military force. Wait a minute. Doesn't say so. I mean, if you want to check an examination of the text of the Charter, when the Charter means military force, they say so. It says military force, military attack, armed attack. If it's not specified, it means any use of force. And let's face it, hybrid war is war. Hybrid war, non-conventional war, unilateral coercive measures kill tens of thousands of people. They have killed tens of thousands of people in Cuba, Nicaragua, in Syria, in Venezuela, etc., etc. They've been condemned year after year by the General Assembly. The last resolution was 77/214 of 15 December 2022, adopted by a huge majority, more than 2/3. Of course, who was opposing it? The so-called collective West. And in the Human Rights Council, it was just adopted a couple of months ago, on the 3rd of April, 2023. That's resolution 52/13, adopted at the 52nd session. And again, overwhelming, more than 2/3 rejecting unilateral coercive measures as a violation of international law, as a violation of the UN Charter, as a violation of general principles of law, of the sovereignty of states, the prohibition of interference in the internal affairs of states, the very customary international freedom of navigation, freedom of commerce, etc., etc. 30 resolutions concerning Cuba. Imagine that. 30 that specifically say, lift this damn embargo. And it tells countries, don't you dare implement the US measures. Don't you dare implement the Helms-Burton Act. It's in there, in the resolutions, in 30 of them. And the last one was adopted by 185 votes in favor, 2 against US and Israel, and 3 abstentions. It's disgraceful that international law is not being observed by those countries that ought to define themselves as the good guys. That is something that I describe in the human rights industry. I go in detail into dysfunctions of the Human Rights Council, but not only. I go into dysfunctions of the Secretariat of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, and also the problems of who gets recruited these days into the Secretariat. What is the system of recruiting people, and why is it that there is an overwhelming representation either of Western countries or of individuals who were educated in the Western countries and who are towing the line? Same thing applies with regard to the special rapporteurs. I would say that of the special rapporteurs, maybe 20% are independent. 20% write their own reports, when 20% are objective. The others are either ideologues or they're actually serving a hegemon. And that is a problem. That is, if you hijack a system, you have a problem already raised by the Roman author Juvenalis in his satires. In the 6th satire, you read this little line, quis custodiet ipsos custodes. Who is guarding over the guardians? What do you do when the guardian betrays you? When the guardian who should be defending your rights, when the institution that should be protecting you is the institution that's going to betray you. And that is where we're at. We have the Organization for the Prevention or Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Absolutely scandalous. What they did with the Duma report, what they did with many of their so-called investigations is to tailor it to the needs of the United States, because the United States had to justify its illegal bombing of Syria. So you want to justify it on the basis that Assad has used weapons, chemical weapons on his own people. Well, that was never proven. As a matter of fact, the inspectors who went to Duma determined that it's not even certain that there was any use of chemical weapons at all. And secondly, the 2 or 3 photographs of so what they claimed was a Syrian bomb that containing was placed there. That was staged. So this thing is such a scandal because when the inspectors went public, then they were denigrated. They were defamed by the press. They were defamed by the office itself. So what happens? You have Jose Bustani, the first Director General of OPCT, of the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, coming out and said, this is scandalous. It must be investigated thoroughly, unless you want to lose all of your credibility. He is supported by Professor Richard Falk. He is supported by Hans Christoph von Sponeck, who had been the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Aid in Iraq. And who knows what he's talking about. In any event, there's been a cover-up. And myself, in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and myself as a long-serving UN official and long-serving special rapporteur, how many cover-ups have I seen? It is, I mean, the system has been corrupted. On the other hand, it's not at all my intention to tear it down. Quite the contrary. I think we need a Human Rights Council. We need an Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We need the United Nations. If we didn't have it, we'd have to invent it. And thank God, you know, we had a United Nations in 1962. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. If they had not been a forum in which Adlai Stevenson III and Valentin Zorin could have crossed swords and negotiated for a quid pro quo during the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62, we wouldn't be here. And the United Nations facilitated the fact that Khrushchev took the missiles away from Cuba, and the United States took the missiles away from Turkey. But as I said, that is what is really important, peace. Because peace is the ultimate enabling right. You can only enjoy civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights if you have peace. And that's also one of the reasons why in this book, in Building a Just World Order, I proposed a new functional paradigm of human rights. It is scandalous how academia, many professors, are still in this obsolete mindset. And they keep saying rights of the first generation, civil and political, second generation, economic, social, and cultural, third generation's right to development, right to peace, et cetera, et cetera. What they mean is we're only interested in business-friendly rights. We're only interested in civil and political rights and the right to invest and the right, you know, to be rich and become richer. But economic, social, and cultural rights, social rights, civil service that will guarantee the right to health and the right to education and the right to shelter, etc. No, that costs too much money. So there's very little being done in that field in the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights. And although, of course, we have a department that takes care of the Sustainable Development Goals, these wonderful 17 goals, and I endorse each and every one of them. But there's no way in the world, I mean, let's face it, we cannot achieve those goals or even get close to achieving those goals as long as we spend trillions of dollars in war, as long as our military budgets, rather than being reduced and recycled into development, we are killing people and we are burning, you know, all the resources. So there's no way with the military budgets that we have in the United States, United Kingdom, in France, in Germany, et cetera, no way in the world that we can achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So going back to my concrete, implementable, pragmatic proposals, I have formulated here how the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has to be restructured. Also, how the selection of special rapporteurs has to be conducted so that you don't end up with a bunch of rapporteurs who are just towing the US and the Brussels line. My, shall we say, optimism goes in the direction of what we've seen over the last few years, the growth of BRICS, the growth of the Belt and Road Initiative, the fact that the global majority, and when I say global majority, I don't only mean the global South. I mean the global majority is China and India and Indonesia and South Africa and Brazil and Mexico, etc. These countries have a different perspective on human rights, and these countries actually want to advance on human rights, and they're being hindered by this artificial system that has been established in Geneva, and that actually is getting worse and worse. I am very keen on hearing what Dr. Tian and Dr. Ali and Dr. Aguirre will tell us later on. And my hope would be, and that is my call, not only on you colleagues who are participating, but also on the audience, whoever listens to this program. If you have a kid in school, I think we need a global compact on education. We need a compact on education for peace. We need a compact on education for empathy, to respect the other, to consider that mutual respect is the cornerstone of stability. And we have to abandon the unipolar mentality. We have to abandon the idea, for instance, that we Americans are an exceptional country, as Madeleine Albright used to say, the indispensable country, that we have a mission to bring democracy and human rights and happiness to the rest of the world. I mean, no, this is pure arrogance. This is a fantasy. We need international solidarity in the sense of Virginia Dandan, whom I used to appreciate a great deal. Virginia Dandan was the first rapporteur on international solidarity. And I think there is a right to international solidarity. I mean, we're all in this little planet of ours, and we have to see how we don't destroy the planet and how we reach a modus vivendi, how we learn to live with each other. I'm not saying love your neighbor, at least stop hating him. I mean, stop engaging in this rabid Russophobia that you have every day in the New York Times and in the Washington Post, this rabid xenophobia that you also get everywhere. And I want the listeners and the audience to demand, why are my 25 principles of international order, which I presented officially to the Human Rights Council in 2018, why are they not being taught in universities throughout the world? I mean, I think that this book, The Building a Just World Order, should be in the curriculum of international relations, international law, human rights law, in all colleges and universities. And the 25 principles should be taught. I assure you, if the 25 principles were observed, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in today. And then I want other books to be put on the curricula. I know personally, and I very much respect President Jimmy Carter. He is one of the few presidents whom I really respect. And my colleague, Niels Meltzer. Niels Meltzer published, it was a rapporteur on torture. He wrote a book, 2022, on Julian Assange. This is the German original version, Der Fall Julian Assange. The American version came out with Verso Books in New York under the title The Trial of Julian Assange. This one of my heroes, Edward Snowden, he's done a lot for humanity. This one, another one of my heroes, John Mearsheimer, the author of The Great Delusion, who predicted the war in Ukraine, who condemned the stupidity of provoking, as Pope Francis said, if you keep barking at somebody, that somebody is going to, sooner or later, is going to respond. And my friend, Carlos Villan Duran, the president of the Spanish Society for International Human Rights Law, has been the spiritus rector of the movement for recognizing peace as a human right. I mean, if we achieve that, that will be a great achievement. Now, the Human Rights Committee, secretary of which I was, and I wrote a book called Human Rights Committee Case Law. Well, the Human Rights Committee has failed to elevate peace to this level of recognition as an individual, juridical, justiciable, enforceable human right. The best that the committee did was back in 1982 and again in 1984 when they adopted general comments on Article 6, the right to life. And they put their finger on war and put the finger that the greatest violation of human rights is war. And those who are engaging in warmongering, those who are engaging in war propaganda, those are the greatest criminals. Those are the greatest violators of human rights. But that's not what you hear in the Human Rights Council today. I mean, in the Human Rights Council today, I mean, they justify provoking, and you say, who is the bad guy? The guy who lost his nerve and shot the first bullet. You know, that approach is a very self-serving approach and very hypocritical approach. And that is supported, unfortunately, by the mainstream media and by what I call the mainstream non-governmental organizations. I used to be a member of Amnesty International. I quit many years ago. And I find that the large NGOs that are enormously financed by the US, etc., they have lost their independence. Yes, David, I know I've talked too much.
No, don't worry. Thank you very much. I know that it's very important to listen to you because you have very much experience in the United Nations, as you know. So I am in the UN. So too, as you, so not with the same experience, but I am in general in presence in the United Nations, and I know until which point the human rights can be politicized. And I have just to mention the situation of the Afro-Descendant Forum of the United Nations, that actually it's as like an instrument of the United States, France, and the United Kingdom. But this is maybe another theme that we can approach, a theme that maybe can be talking another time, because it's really connected and entering the context of the book that you wrote just many months ago. So thank you again. I will give the floor to the Dr. Mahmoud Ali, Senior Fellow of East-West Bridge, Associate Fellow at the Institute of China Studies, University of Malaya, and former BBC editor there. Ali, good evening to you. I would just, before you start, I will just remember that each one of you have 10 minutes to talk. Only that. So you can start there, Ali. Thank you very much to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your gracious introduction. I thank the organizers at East-West Bridge Network. This is a significant theme within the systemic discourse of our time, as explained in this book by Professor Desaias. He has graphically described, as we just saw, the inconsistent interpretation, and he has explained the selective application of human rights by state parties, including the systemic private, his own country, as he mentioned, the United States, and its coalition partners. Using empirical evidence from the post-Cold War period, it could be stated that the concept of human rights has often been used as a political diplomatic tool of geopolitical leverage or strategic coercion. So allow me to supplement Professor Desaios's keynote remarks with 3 instances of this pattern. The latter 2 are from the professor's long list of case studies, but the first is based on Brown University's The Cost of War Project. Brown University's Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs is located in Providence, Rhode Island, in the USA. Watson Institute's The Costs of War Project collects, collates, analyzes, and disseminates data from around the world from open as well as protected sources of information. The latest data sets were updated in August, just last month. Focusing on just one aspect of US military operations conducted worldwide using lethal force since November 2001, casualties of war since the USA launched military campaigns in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, parts of the Sahel, and other countries, it is useful to examine directly war-caused deaths in major war zones. Brown University reports casualty figures from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and elsewhere up to March of this year. This data merits attention. In Afghanistan, the total number of people killed in figures rounded to the nearest thousand is 176,000. Of them, Afghan civilians total 46,319. In Pakistan, total number killed 67,000. Pakistani civilians killed 24,099. And in Iraq, total number killed between 281,000 and 315,000. These are people. Up to 210,038 of them are Iraqi civilians. US civilians were killed 3,665. In Syria, including in operations against the so-called Islamic State or ISIS, the total number of people killed stood at 269,000. Syrian civilians killed 138,947. In Yemen, the number of people directly killed as a result of the war stood at 112,000. The number of Yemeni civilians killed is not yet available. In other countries such as Libya, where US-led NATO operations ousted Muammar Gaddafi, and Somalia or Sudan, where US and allied special operation forces have been conducting strikes, data is still unavailable. But from what the Costs of War Project has gathered from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, up to 940,000 people were killed by March of this year. And of them, up to 432,093 were local civilians. That is 46% of all the direct casualties of these wars have been native civilians or non-combatants. Brown University researchers report around 3.7 million people have died indirectly in the post-9/11 war zones, raising the total death toll, and I quote, to at least 4.5 million to 4.7 million and counting, unquote. These wars have forced 38 million people out of their homes as refugees or displaced persons. The United States government is, quote, conducting counter-terror operations or activities in 85 countries, unquote. Brown University researchers affirm that, quote, the wars have been accompanied by violations of human rights and liberties in the United States and abroad, unquote. I suggest to you, as the professor said, that the most fundamental human right is the right to life, particularly applicable to all humans who are not professionally or voluntarily engaged in the profession of arms. That is, everyone who is a civilian or a non-combatant. This right is recognized, acknowledged, and formalized via a series of conventions, the earliest of which are at least a century old. And yet, the reality is that the dominant system within the contemporary international security system has, over the past decades, actively, consciously, and deliberately engaged in the application of lethal violence, which has caused the death, disablement, displacement, or destitution of millions of innocent civilians. When those very same actors raise concerns over human rights violations, then it is rationally quite difficult to treat their remarks seriously. Now, two other instances of the contrast between state-centric assertions of national security imperatives and question of violations of human rights of either one's own citizens or other people or foreigners whose rights one claims to be protecting. Taken from the author's list of case studies, details of both cases here are taken from well-regarded public domain sources. The first case is summarized from records of the Open Society Justice Initiative, an advocacy group of lawyers and jurists based in Abuja, Berlin, Brussels, The Hague, London, Mexico City, New York City, and Washington, D.C. Since the Justice Initiative operates freely in and from all these major cities, one can assume they are considered to be pursuing legitimate legal advocacy activities. Former Private First Class Bradley Manning, later Chelsea Manning, gained fame as a US Army soldier who, quote, found documents which suggested that there had been more than 15,000 unreported civilian deaths in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that the US military had failed to investigate detainee abuse and torture, unquote. Manning released, quote, thousands of pages of documents to WikiLeaks, unquote. She was, quote, charged with espionage offenses and on conviction was sentenced to 35 years imprisonment, unquote. When Manning appealed, the Justice Initiative filed an amicus curiae brief, arguing the sentence was disproportionate and unreasonable. In 2017, President Obama, quote, acknowledging that it was disproportionate compared with others convicted of leaking documents, unquote, commuted her sentence. Justice Initiative records that while serving as an army intelligence analyst in Baghdad in 2010, Manning learned of violations of US military's rules of engagement and, quote, thousands of civilian deaths that were unreported and uninvestigated by the military. Deeply troubled by this information, Manning uploaded to WikiLeaks over 700,000 classified documents regarding wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and a video dubbed Collateral Murder taken from a military helicopter. Quote, the gunsight video shows soldiers in a US military helicopter shooting down suspected insurgents who were in fact civilians. The soldiers are heard congratulating each other on shooting the people and even encouraging one another to shoot the wounded who are trying to crawl away, cheering when they get a kill, unquote. Arrested and tried, Manning was found guilty of 20 charges relating to accusations that, quote, between 1st November 2009 and 27th May 2010, she wrongfully and wantonly caused to be published on the internet intelligence belonging to the United States government, knowing that the intelligence would be accessible to the enemy and that her conduct was therefore prejudicial to good order and discipline in the armed forces and of a nature to bring discredit upon the armed forces, unquote. On 21st August 2013, Manning was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Court documents make no mention of the rights to the life of the helpless civilians targeted, killed, or wounded by US soldiers seemingly enjoying the act of shooting unarmed victims. The final instance being presented is also taken from Professor Desaios's list of case studies. On 21st June 2013, the US Department of Justice unsealed charges against former NSA contractor, National Security Agency, Edward Snowden. He faced 2 counts of violating Espionage Act of 1917 and theft of government property. The Department of State directly revoked his passport. Details have been taken from records of the US National Whistleblower Center, based in Washington, D.C. In 2013, Snowden, quote, revealed the existence of previously classified mass intelligence gathering surveillance programs run by the US NSA and the United Kingdom's Intelligence Organization Government Communications Headquarters, or GCHQ. For this, Snowden was charged with espionage by the US government and subsequently fled the country, unquote. The National Whistleblower Center observed that, quote, Snowden's exposure of NSA surveillance is a controversial subject Supporters claim he's a hero, while detractors say he's un-American, unquote. On the 10th anniversary of the revelations, one of the three Western journalists assigned to meet the then unknown whistleblower wrote in the Atlantic very recently, quote, Snowden had become disillusioned by what he had seen inside the NSA of the scale of intrusion into privacy in the post 9/11 United States, some of it illegal, and around the world, unquote. In 2013, the three journalists, including the author of the Atlantic piece, Ewan McCaskill, spent several days interviewing Snowden in Hong Kong. When McCaskill asked for some evidence of Snowden's allegations, he gave the journalist a memory stick with, quote, tens of thousands of documents covering both the NSA and the GCHQ, unquote. These formed the basis for subsequent reporting by The Guardian, the New York Times, and ProPublica. The Washington Post's Barton Gilman, who covered the Snowden disclosures from Washington, wrote, quote, taken together, the revelations have brought to light a system that cast off many of its historical restraints after the attacks of September 11, 2001. Secret legal authorities empowered the NSA to sweep the telephone, internet, and location records of whole populations, unquote. I shall now cut to the chase, come to the closing point, and that is, McCaskill writes, the former head of the GCHQ, Sir David Oman, told him Snowden's leaks had caused much damage. Quote, on the downside, I think it is pretty significant that operations had to be halted, unquote. He added, Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, better known as MI6, quote, had to close human intelligence operations down for fear of information analyzed by Russian, the Chinese, and the Iranians, unquote. What happened to media collections, etc., is very controversial. It is still unresolved, and there's a great deal of stuff there that one can look up. I will just close that. I commend the author, Professor Desires, on his detailed research and notable contribution to the human rights discourse. And I will conclude with the observation that, however universalistic the rhetoric, given the record of the past 2 decades, when human rights are raised, context, I suggest, is the key. What rights? Whose rights? Who is talking about these rights and why would be as pertinent as the human in the human rights. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ali, for this important intervention. This is important what you mentioned, because this is something that we never watch on the Western countries, in the Western medias. And evidently it excites an articulation with all the topics that were mentioned by the Professor Alfred de Zayas, and it's most important and most impactant if we know that you was former editor of the BBC. So I think that you know really good how function the media's industry in this way. So thank you very much for this speech. Right now, I will give the floor to our next speaker. He's Mr. Ramai Shakel, the CEO of the Asian Institute of Eco-Civilization Research and Development from Pakistan. So you have the floor. Good evening to you too. Okay, actually, I think that he's not available at the moment. So it's just because a technical problem, but we will so jump for the other speaker, a really good friend, good professor, really consequent in the job that he make. This is the Dr. Li Tian, Associate Professor of Law School of Shandong University in China, Director General of the Center for Human Rights and Peaceful Development, GGI. Tian Li. Good evening to you.
Thank you, David. And thanks, Sam, to the International Association for Human Rights and the Social Development for once again inviting me here and to participate in this side event that organized during the Human Rights Council session right now. And the ideas I would like to share with you tonight are centered on, of course, and inspired by Professor Desir's new book, Praise of the Human Rights Industry. So please allow me once again to express my sincere respect and warmest congratulations to Professor. And regarding this book, I was very honored to have a head start in June this year. When I got my hands on the book, I was not in a hurry to open it, but rather rested my eyes on one word in the title of this book, industry. And the first thing that came to my mind was that the verb form of this word, industry, industrialized, which represents the process and presupposes industrializability, which can be described by the wide variety of phrases in English, but there doesn't seem to be a direct equivalent. Then I was thinking that if this hypothesis of mine was the first key message that Professor Desires wanted to tell us, then he would certainly tell us exactly what this industry is. So I started looking for the answer in this book. And this answer, as I understand it, is that human rights may be a narrative, as Professor Desires once told us, an industry that needs to be properly managed. However, from the birth of the modern international human rights regime, as I observed, which dates back to 1946 or earlier, for example, from the WWII conference, a series of internal and external reasons have led to a significant portion of the population believing that there is an ambivalent love-hate sentiment towards human rights. And even especially when you look at the double standard behavior of some states and non-state actors in picking and choosing international human rights norms in practice. Let me take an example of the WWII proposal in 1944. When representatives of the four powers, the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, were so busy trying to maximize their own interests in the arrangement of the post-war order that they left human rights, a goal and a value rapidly mentioned in the World War II, behind. And it was not until the last moment of the conference that former United States President Roosevelt, at the suggestion of his advisors, proposed the human rights clauses with the aim of competing for the right to speak with Soviet Union. This also led to the awkward position of human rights clauses in the United Nations Charter. Decades have passed, and we may have become paralyzed by the endless malicious complaints about human rights violations. Now, rather than stop there, Professor Desir's book brings us a methodological thinking of the ways in which narrative managers in government, business, NGOs, and the media shape our perceptions of human rights, as well as the results it generated. It has provided me with many valuable guidelines for my ongoing teaching of international law in my university, both for the undergraduate students and the postgraduate students, even the doctorate students. And not only just in specific in international human rights law, but international law in general. Because Professor, and you just mentioned the Human Rights Committee, and I once asked a question in my classroom that, yes, here we have the 9 core human rights instruments, international human rights treaties with its treaty bodies. But why the ICCPR, with its the treaty board is named in Human Rights Committee rather than the Committee of International Civil and Political Rights? And and I told a very long story to them, because in the very beginning, the International Bill of Human Rights should shape only one document, with the preamble of Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted in 1948 as its preamble. And the International Bill of Rights, composed of today's the ICTPR and the ICSCR together. But because of the Cold War and other reasons that we are all known that this Human Rights Committee is only the treaty bodies for the international ICCPR, and ICESCR has its another treaty bodies. And I think this story is very interesting. And because time constraint, I will not elaborate on more examples here. Rather, I would like to take advantage of today's important occasion to share with you some preliminary reflections that I have made inspired by Zayas' book. My reflections begin with the question that I asked myself. From the establishment of the United Nations, especially the creation of its human rights framework and mechanisms to the present day, its openness and accessibility have been increasing. And in these decades, almost everyone has joined the process of industrialization of human rights, in which it is no longer possible for human rights to maintain their own ontological nature. With the establishment of the various human rights mechanisms, human rights have become, in a sense, objects, instrumentalized to serve other purposes. At institutional level, this instrumentalization is manifested in the division of labor between political and judicial human rights mechanisms, and of course, the quasi-judicial human rights mechanisms that lies in between. The problem we face today is that we may have expectations of these mechanisms that are not in line with or exceeds their capacity. For example, one might expect the Human Rights Council to become a judicial-like body and push for its reform in that direction. Another fact that may be difficult for many human rights activists to accept, but has to be accepted, is that their participation is becoming more and more a mere formality, as exemplified by the 90 seconds rule that your book mentioned. I don't know whether you remember that I was the victim of this 90 seconds rules, because when you serve as the expert in the United Nations, yes, and I make a recording. And so there is nothing happened afterwards. This is what I say the mere formality refers to. So if time permits, I would like to say a few words about the judiciary, starting with the fact that there is no specific court of human rights at international level. It was a proposal put forward in the 1940s by representatives of Australia, and the first opponents were the United States and its allies, who were subsequently joined by the Soviet Union and other countries. About 2010, some scholars, especially Professor Manfred Nowak and Professor Martin Shining, and Nowak is my supervisor at the University of Vienna. Yes, and I'm doing the doctorate there, and I myself was doing research in this area when I was studying this subject. But today, it still seems like a utopian vision of the World Court of Human Rights, and the judicial institution closest to human rights then is the International Criminal Court. Yet this court has also received the most critics, from its organizational structure to the trial of specific cases, especially at the prosecutor's level. The court has become under the hardest critics, that is the heavy politicalization of the justice, especially in the context of the previous Afghan problem and the current Russian-Ukraine conflict. Of course, this is from the perspective of the lawyer. However, and this is the last point I would like to make, the actors in the human rights industry are not only legal practitioners, but also the media, civil society, and so on. They may have different views on controversial cases that are being heard by the ICC and also by the ICJ. For example, many people, including me, may not agree that genocide has taken place in Russia and Ukraine because they would go by law, especially according to the 1948 Genocide Convention. And in the field of human rights, it is important to recognize the difference between lawyers who believe only in legal violations based on casualty and human rights activists who believe that it is enough that there is a negative impact. Hybrid warfare, especially unilateral sanctions, which you have mentioned, is a good example. And the difference, and last, the difference is the resulting debates are normal to me. Sometimes we only see conflicts and contradictions, but one thing we all have in common is that we all use the same language, the human rights language, to justify one act or express denunciation and anger at another. The question then rises as to what kind of approach we need to address the dilemma of the moment in a common phase. Your book further gives us your answer. In my opinion, these suggestions, for example, but in another book, the 25 principles you mentioned are operational and universally applicable, and deserve to be taken serious by each and every one of us. And then this so my presentation and some preliminary thought of your book. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you there, Lee. You mentioned many topics really important and many examples that maybe have to be thinking not only in the context of the human right, but I think overall in the universities where we will have the next human rights defenders, the next experts, and the future of the world. Students that maybe don't know or don't have these examples that you give, that will never read a book as a book like Alfred wrote, because we know that the medias and some universities are part of these mechanisms that will maintain the power and the system that control actually the world, a system that actually it's failing, and that in any case we have to be ready to be there and see how can we continue our fight with the example that give us Alfred, with the example that give us, for example, people that was mentioned before, like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden. This is something important to take in account. And really thank you very, very much for this intervention, for your recommendation. I think that Professor Desayas taking count all the topics and points that are mentioned, not only by you, but by the others panelists too. And this is important to know that. So thank you again, Xie. I will give the floor to our next speaker. He will talk in Spanish. I will make the presentation maybe in English, and after I will make an introduction to him in Spanish. He's a really good friend too, a really good fighter of human rights. He's Venezuelan. He lives actually in Colombia. Gabriel Aguirre. He was former member of the COSI. It's an international organization of solidarity in Venezuela, and actually he staff at the World Beyond War. So, Gabriel, buenos días para ti en Colombia, en Bogotá. Saludos y gracias por estar aquí presente.
Muy buenos días, muchísimas gracias, David. Buenas tardes para ustedes que están en Ginebra y buenas noches para el profesor Xian Li Qian, y a los compañeros que están en Pakistán también, que están en horario nocturno. Quiero pedir disculpas a mis colegas panelistas porque evidentemente voy a hablar en inglés, eso puede dificultar el tema de la comprensión. Yo quiero agradecer especialmente a Aides y al profesor Alfredo Sayas por invitarnos y tener el honor y el privilegio de compartir este lanzamiento de su libro. Creo que es indudablemente un espacio muy importante para todas y para todos nosotros. Hoy la discusión y el debate sobre el tema de los derechos humanos es algo central. Yo creo que si algo ha sido muy importante en toda la carrera y en todo el desarrollo académico, profesional, laboral, intelectual y activista del profesor Alfredo Sayas, ha sido justamente plasmar en letras, en contenido, en sus libros, parte de lo que ha sido su experiencia y su tránsito por todo el tema de lo que tiene que ver con la defensa de los derechos humanos, pero además lograr hilvanarlos con problemas que son mucho más complejos, con los problemas de un orden mundial justo, y allí quiero agradecer especialmente en nombre de World Beyond World la posibilidad y el espacio que nos dedicó en nuestro club de lectura para presentar su libro sobre construyendo un orden mundial justo. Entonces son espacios que indudablemente han sido muy importantes, son hilos conectores que nos permiten tener una mejor comprensión de la dinámica que hoy está en desarrollo en el mundo. Por eso yo creo que a veces es muy complicado hablar solamente de un libro de la industria de los derechos humanos sin hablar de construyendo un orden mundial justo, y por eso el profesor Alfredo Sayas justamente nos permite y nos trae a colación ambos textos, ¿ok? Porque hay hilos conductores en todo este tema. Particularmente el tema de los derechos humanos en América Latina ha sido un tema central y sobre todo que ha tenido en los últimos años una repercusión de gran impacto a consecuencia de múltiples desarrollos que están en nuestro continente, en nuestra región en América Latina y en otras partes del mundo también. Pero hay que decirlo, especialmente en América Latina, pareciera que en los últimos años se sigue afianzando en principio el tema del armamentismo, el tema del militarismo, recordar la presencia de las bases militares estadounidenses y también de la OTAN en nuestro continente. La OTAN, que además ya no solamente tiene bases militares, sino que además ha venido agregando a países, en el caso de Colombia, como socio global de la OTAN, una categoría novedosa dentro del contexto de la OTAN, pero que indudablemente busca, en resumidas cuentas, fortalecer este instrumento que en algunos espacios yo he afirmado que indudablemente la OTAN es el dedo en el gatillo del imperialismo. Y lo hemos visto con lo que está ocurriendo, en este caso con el desarrollo y el escalamiento de la guerra en Ucrania, y que indudablemente la OTAN tiene una cuota inmensa de responsabilidad y en nuestro continente lo está haciendo de igual forma. Recientemente, en el pasado mes de junio, ingresaron más de 1.200 tropas militares estadounidenses a territorio peruano, cosa que nosotros hemos denunciado de manera activa y que por supuesto forma parte del incremento de la presencia militar de Estados Unidos en esta región. Y fíjate un poco lo que justamente conectaba con el profesor Alfredo Sayas, esta región donde justamente ingresaron los militares, las tropas militares estadounidenses, fue en la región de Puno, una región donde se cometieron múltiples violaciones a los derechos humanos durante las protestas posterior a la deposición del presidente Pedro Castillo en diciembre y enero. Entonces, cómo un tema de los derechos humanos va de la mano con el tema del militarismo. Es decir, con el poco respeto que inclusive sienten, en este caso las potencias de Occidente por el tema de los derechos humanos, justamente tiene que ver y está interconectado con estos aspectos. No solamente esto, sino que además recientemente Ecuador ha firmado un tratado militar con Estados Unidos, un tratado que se extiende por 7 años, ¿ok? Antes que deje el gobierno Guillermo Lasso, justamente en un nuevo periodo presidencial, y que indudablemente, si pudiésemos tener una lectura clara de lo que está ocurriendo allí, vamos a encontrarnos con que efectivamente los pasos siguientes, tanto en el caso de Perú como en el caso de Ecuador, serán progresivamente proponer un ingreso como socio global de la OTAN en la misma categoría de lo que está ocurriendo en el caso de Colombia. Entonces, estamos frente a un contexto muy peligroso en América Latina. Estamos frente a un contexto además en una región, y particularmente tiene que ver con Perú, con Argentina, y Bolivia, el Triángulo del Litio. La jefa del Comando Sur está en una intensa agenda de desarrollo en nuestra región, visitando múltiples países justamente para garantizar todo lo que tiene que ver con el dominio geopolítico, con el dominio militar y por supuesto, entre otras cosas, el dominio ideológico, entre otras cosas, en nuestra región y en nuestro continente, en el cual todos los países que se propongan defender medianamente su soberanía, su independencia, entonces son condenados, son señalados, son identificados como un instrumento del mal, porque así además lo han caracterizado, y no conforme a eso, imponen medidas coercitivas unilaterales, totalmente ilegales, totalmente irrespetuosas del derecho internacional, pero como lo decía el profesor Alfred de Saya, hay un marco normativo que justamente es el que regula todas las medidas que se impongan, las medidas coercitivas que se impongan en el mundo, y no es precisamente una potencia que unilateralmente decide imponerle un conjunto de sanciones, en inglés que se comprende un poco mejor, pero que indudablemente son medidas coercitivas unilaterales. Venezuela es un país testigo de eso. 111 instrumentos se han aprobado desde el año 2014, desde que fueron aprobadas aquella orden ejecutiva de señalar a Venezuela como una amenaza inusual extraordinaria por parte del gobierno de Barack Obama. Más de 930 sanciones, medidas particulares han sido aplicadas contra el país, un país que ha perdido cerca de 100.000 millones de dólares durante todos estos años de sanciones, un país en el cual han sido sancionadas 173 personas, por ejemplo, en la mayoría de ellas, jefes de instituciones, el jefe de Estado, jefe de espacios importantes, indudablemente creando una complejidad en el normal desarrollo de la vida en el país. 161 empresas, de las cuales una de las más estratégicas es PDVSA, que es el corazón de la economía venezolana. 65 buques, ¿okay?, que es prácticamente lo que posee la industria petrolera para poder comercializar el petróleo, y más de 59 aeronaves, que también forma parte del corazón de la economía en torno a las principales aerolíneas del país. Y uno de los robos que ha sido, y hay que caracterizarlo de esa forma, uno de los robos más grotescos que ha sido el caso de Citgo, una empresa valorada en 11.000 millones de dólares, con sede en Estados Unidos, que desde hace muchos años, porque este era un proyecto de Estados Unidos, desde hace muchos años tenía su mirada puesta sobre esta principal refinería de la industria venezolana, y aprovechó la coyuntura, como bien lo hizo con otros contextos. Hay que recordar lo que también sucedió en el caso libio, donde las reservas internacionales del país se desaparecieron una vez que se escaló la guerra. Entonces, estamos frente a un contexto que realmente limita los derechos básicos, el derecho a la salud, el derecho a la alimentación, el derecho a la vivienda, el derecho a una educación gratuita, y que por supuesto pone en tela de juicio lo que en el latín se diría otio cum dignitate, que al final es la posibilidad y la capacidad de todas y de todos los seres humanos de desarrollarnos y desenvolver todas nuestras capacidades conforme a cómo van ocurriendo y cómo vamos mirando la vida. Y eso es lo que justamente está sucediendo con el pueblo venezolano, y con el pueblo nicaragüense, y con el pueblo cubano, y con el pueblo de Siria, y con el pueblo ruso. Cuando tú impones un conjunto de medidas coercitivas unilaterales, tú estás, entre otras cosas, limitando, no solamente negando solamente sus derechos, sino negando la capacidad y la posibilidad de ser libres, de tener la capacidad el derecho al desarrollo, que es tan fundamental en estos aspectos. Nosotros creemos que frente a esta realidad y frente a este contexto, es muy importante y fundamental hoy que avancemos sobre la construcción de normas universales para todas y para todos. Normas de cooperación, no un equilibrio basado en el poder y en el ejercicio de la fuerza, sino un equilibrio basado fundamentalmente en normas universales de respeto. Y esto implica otros temas que ya hemos venido pronunciando, y el profesor Alfred de Sayas también ha sido defensor de estas ideas, que ha sido el tema de la democratización de la ONU, de inclusive reformar algunos espacios, como él bien lo señalaba. No se trata de erradicar instancias que ya existen. Es necesaria la Oficina del Alto Comisionado, es necesario un Consejo de los Derechos Humanos, es necesario una Asamblea General. Son instrumentos y herramientas que hoy permiten poner orden dentro de una estructura, dentro de un caos en el cual se desarrolla el mundo y que, por supuesto, los países tienen los países y la sociedad civil tienen la necesidad de ponerse de acuerdo en torno a qué forma conducir y orientar el destino de nuestra sociedad. Y si no, vayamos a un ejemplo mucho más reciente. Todo lo ocurrido en nuestro mundo con la situación de la pandemia y del COVID-19 nos pone en la más clara realidad de cómo debemos nosotros enfrentar futuros problemas, que debemos hacerlo basados en algo importante que él señalaba, el tema del principio de la solidaridad internacional. Fue algo que quedó en entredicho en el contexto de la pandemia del COVID-19 y que la humanidad debe aprender, debemos aprender sobre estos desarrollos, sobre estos aspectos, para no cometer futuros acciones que nos pongan en riesgo, inclusive que pongan en riesgo la continuidad de la vida de toda la especie humana y de los seres vivos en general, porque como también he señalado en algunos momentos, los animales, las plantas no tienen la responsabilidad de lo que hacemos los seres humanos, entre otras cosas, y la posibilidad de una confrontación nuclear, la posibilidad de avanzar en el proceso de extinción es algo que está en las puertas de nuestra humanidad, y yo creo que todo lo que viene desarrollando el profesor Alfred de Saya en sus libros y en estos espacios, porque hay que recordarlo, él atiende múltiples espacios de seminarios, de entrevistas, de conferencias, para justamente trabajar en el proceso de educación para, en resumidas cuentas, para mí, una educación para la paz. Y yo creo que ese es el tema central en el cual nos ha convocado. Profesor Alfred Sayas, muchísimas gracias nuevamente por compartirnos sus experiencias, por compartirnos su importante mensaje en contenido, y desde nuestras organizaciones y desde nuestra plataforma haremos todos los esfuerzos para continuar visibilizando todo lo que usted ha venido referenciando y reflejando durante años de trabajo, años de investigación, de desarrollo y de acción práctica cotidiana en la vida. Entonces, a Aides nuevamente agradecerles el espacio, y profesor, nuevamente muchísimas gracias.
Gracias por lo que mencionas, además porque es supremamente importante todo lo que dices, y voy a hacer un paréntesis en español, después lo diré en inglés. Es muy necesario tener una asamblea general, es necesario tener un Consejo de Derechos Humanos, democratizarlo, pero no hacerle la promoción que le estaba haciendo Joe Biden esta semana en la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas, donde estaba pidiendo una reforma del Consejo de Seguridad de las Naciones Unidas en compañía de Alain Berset, presidente de la Confederación Suiza, donde el objetivo de ellos es sacar a Rusia de ahí para que se mantenga el control que en un principio se quería tener del Consejo de Seguridad de las Naciones Unidas. Recordemos incluso que la China que se agrega al Consejo de Seguridad de las Naciones Unidas no es la China actual, sino la China de Chiang Kai-shek, ¿no? Y al final le sale el tiro por la culata, entonces ellos como que quieren aprovechar esta situación para voltearla, y es supremamente importante mencionarlo, y te agradezco mucho, Gabriel, por esas importantes reflexiones, porque siempre son muy importantes mencionarlas. So, thank you very much to Gabriel for this intervention. It was really interesting. He mentioned that, of course, we have to democratize the instrument of the United Nations, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, the Security Council, and others instruments of the UN that actually are under the power of the countries, or the Western countries, that have from every time the power and the decisions to make of this world what they want, with the threat of nuclear war, with the presence of many militaries in the Americas. He gave the example of Peru, with more than 1,500 militaries that actually arrived in Peru from the United States, with the geostrategy on geopolitics idea of the control, to have the control of the region. He gave examples about the unilateral coercive measures that leave actually Venezuela, the instrumentalization of Colombia in the interest of the United States, and many other issues that maybe we can have the possibility after to have in English, and maybe give that to the other speaker. Again, thank you very much, Gabriel. And right now, I will give the floor to the second panelist that I called just before, but he was not here, the Dr. Ramai Shakel, the CEO of the Asian Institute of Eco-Civilization Research and Development in Pakistan. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
So you have the floor, 10 minutes. You are free to mention your position about the side event that we make actually.
Thank you. I think, first of all, thank you for inviting me this panel, and especially my friend from China, Mr. Taishan Sachin. He has just invited me to speak on the occasion. Before starting my my talk about the book and what I have learned from this book, the few chapters I have reviewed. So I just want to make a comment on Dr. Muhammad Ali when he was presenting data about the casualties and the people who martyred in Pakistan. It is not the 22,000, it's the 70,000. If you look at the Pakistan official data, 70,000 people have been died due to that war on terror. And the count is still going on, especially after when the USA left Afghanistan in a hurry. So Pakistan have to deal with that because a huge number of refugees are staying in Pakistan. And maybe you have witnessed in a few months. So there was a surge in the terrorist activity in Pakistan, and Pakistan had to put a lot of resources to control that. So the number is too high. So when I see this difference of number in brown estimates and the actual number at the ground, so then I doubt. They also have adopted the same methodology for the Afghanistan, for the Iraq and other countries. The casualties may be many more, and the number they are presenting, that is not a true representative. And after that, I just want to say, they congratulate my friend. So he has wonderfully, he has described the whole system. And the 2 or 3 things which I have learned from there. So one is military-centric economics. I think that is a key to understand if we want to understand the industry, human rights industry. Although it is not on the military-centric, it is a military-industrial complex-centric economics, because they are working hand in hand. Although this complex has been expanded, it started at the military-industrial complex. Then Senator Fulbright described it in 1960. It is a military-industrial and academic complex. And now I have I will take it one more name in there. That is a military, industry, academia, and media complex. They are working together. So this whole, you can say, the system has been designed apart from UNHCR and other institutions. It is military-industrial centric economic model. And for that, they are pursuing their objective. I just want to highlight one example on this front. You take an example of climate change. There are 2 very interesting things which are happening from the last 1.5 decades. One, first they are making a climate change a security threat. Yes, it is, but it's a security multiplier, threat multiplier. And what are the indicators of that threat? That is the food security, water shortage, and there's different types of the disease, health issues, impact on mangroves, impact on seas. So these all indicators, they are human indicators. They are not military indicators, but their focus is on the military solutions. If they are really understanding, so where the threat is coming, that is the human elements, not the military elements. But their focus, if you see, so CIA have created a new department with the name of Climate Change Center, and they're conducting the study how much the infrastructure is prone to climate change. But the important element of the human-centric that is missing. They are creating a space for military so they can keep their business going on. Second, They are doing it for some time, but from the Glasgow COP27, they are taking private sector as a lead player to solve the climate change. I'm wondering, those same companies which created the problem of climate change, contributed to the climate change, know they will solve the problem. But I foresee, in the disguise, they are creating new economic opportunity for these industrialists, for this business community. So their business interests, their complex can keep on running. So military and industry interests are creeping in climate change agenda, but they are presenting in such a beautiful way. So everybody is inclined, yes, private sector have to do this. Why private sector? It's the responsibility of states. The state have to take the action. When the climate change debate started, it started on the basis of equity principle, historical responsibility. But no, the agenda has been shifted. So that is Dr. Adel, he has beautifully, Dr. Zas, he has beautifully described. So the system, in the same way, they are weaponizing the human rights. So that is, I think, that is a worrisome situation we need to understand. And he rightly proposed, Dr. Rezias, we have to take the economy toward the human-centric economy. I like this idea because 2 years back, I delivered a lecture on the same concept on economic security. Either it's a military security or a human security. So my argument was the same. It's a human security. If you are taking out the human, for what you are talking about the security? If the human are missing from the whole puzzle, so what you are talking about? One thing, and second thing, which I have also learned from this book when I was reading the few chapters. So when we talk about the rule-based system, the law-based system, yes, we have the law-based system, but that law belongs to jungle. So who is the more powerful? The rule is, he is dictating the rules. That if we are talking about the rule in that sense, yes, this system is a rule-based. But if we are talking about a system on the basis of justice, fairness, and equity, and a respect for the dignity of a human, maybe then we have to give a second thought to the system. But this does not mean we should get rid of UN or a UNHCR. That is the same argument Dr. Zas has been put forward. So my understanding is that, okay, UNHCR or the UN system could not deliver on the promises that it made. But we have to keep in mind one thing very clearly. It did not perform its function, maybe it's failed, but absence or the omission of UNHCR from the global system will be a disaster for the humanity. So our focus should not so like that, just they are failed or they could not deliver, so you should finish them, you can eliminate them from the system. No. Our focus, what Dr. Zias is talking about, we have to strengthen these institutions. Maybe there are some flaws, and we have to come up with the better ideas. I think that approach is very important because most of the time when we see somebody will try to critically analyze an institution, we make it an enemy. So we say that's the institution enemy, and we have to bring the agenda to that point where people say, take it out of the business. No. We need these institutions. Why? Because we need some platforms where we can talk about. Look, today, we had some platform where we had few successes and major failures, but still we had the platform where we're talking about, where we want to build our debate here. So that was the institution there. So we have to take care of those institutions. And lastly, when I look at when Dr. Zas has been talked about, so one very important thing, which I already have spoken, my friend from China, he also spoke, the world industry. If we understand the dynamics and the meaning of industry, we can understand everything. And we don't need to talk about double standard. We don't need to talk about any other things. If we understand the meaning of the industry. Industry works on single principle. The principle of that, get maximum benefit, one way or other way. And that has been taught us in the capitalism. liberal capitalism, what has been told to us, so your benefits are the prime. That is the focus of the, you can say, the Western, you can say this international relation ontology. This is that there's no permanent friend on the interest of the prime. So we also have to take out that mentality, and industry represents that mentality. I think this is whatever I have reviewed, few chapters. It is a wonderful read, and I will read it more, and then definitely I will write back to Dr. Zoss personally. But these are the few things which I have learned from the book. And thank you, Darsa, for giving the words to our exploration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, there am I, for your comments and for all the topics that you mentioned. You are true that we have to take care of the institution that actually exists, taking account in the system that we are, a system that have in any case to change, I hope really soon. So just I don't know if we are actually in the position to make one question just before to have the intervention of Gustavo, that he's not here, but he sent us a video. I don't know, maybe I can ask to the Professor Desayas what he think in maybe 2 minutes, what he think about the interventions of the other speakers, because so the central point of this meeting is the book, is the 25 principle of international order. What do you think, what do you feel, and what do you hope when you listen these speeches?
Well, obviously, I'm encouraged by what I heard from all of the colleagues who took the floor. And I've taken notes, as you see. I'm constantly taking notes, and I don't give up hope. You know, I've always been a believer in Ovidius's maxim, gutta cavat lapidem. I mean, the drop eventually bores a hole through the stone, and we're not going to give up. We cannot afford to give up for humanity. And we have to recognize where the obstacles are. We have to identify the military, industrial, academic, media complex as the principal obstacle to making progress in this field. When I say the media complex also, I'm concerned about the disinformation, the systematic lying, and the systematic suppression of information. How can you expect in a democratic society or in any other society that people will act when they do not have access to the information? They don't have access to the facts. As I said, in the context of my first visit to Venezuela, that was the first visit by a rapporteur in 21 years. I read everything before going. I read all the reports of Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the International Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, etc. And I realized that we are actually swimming in an ocean of lies. The level of lying and suppression, the things that I actually referred to in my report to the Human Rights Council back in 2018, are pretty shocking. And it confirms not only the politicization of human rights, but what others have called the weaponization of human rights, which I'd like to call it a kind of blasphemy a kind of sacrilege to use the concept of human dignity to destroy human dignity, to use the concept of alleged violations of human rights in country X or Y, so that we can destroy that country and so that we can destabilize, overthrow the government, etc. Professor Stephen Kinzer of the University of Boston, Massachusetts, he wrote a very perceptive book called Overthrow. And he documents the history of coup d'etats and putsches organized by the United States government since 1893, when the US overthrew the Kingdom of Hawaii, and through the application of the Monroe Doctrine, all the coup d'etats that the United States organized in Haiti and in the Dominican Republic and in Grenada and in Guatemala and in Honduras and in Bolivia and everywhere where American interests, business interests, extraction interests, oil interests, simply caused war, caused violence. And that has not been sufficiently understood in the world. Another author who has addressed this is Norman Solomon. Norman Solomon, in a book, famous book called War Made Easy, he describes how the media makes war palatable, makes war plausible. The idea is to demonize a rival so that when you attack the rival, the population more or less accepts it because it's a bad guy anyhow. You know, Tacitus in his famous book Agricola already said it is in human nature to hate whomever you have injured. And I go one further than Tacitus. I say it is Machiavellian. It is exactly what's going on right now. We first create hate. We incite to hatred, whether it be hatred against Nicolas Maduro or hatred against the Castro brothers or hatred against Ortega, so that we can justify going in there and toppling the government. And it's amazing how patient the American public has been, how naive, how gullible, that they have bought this mendacious propaganda time and time again. The very same playbook is being used now in the context of Ukraine. Cynically, we spent years demonizing Putin so that we could create the impression that a proxy war against Russia was necessary. As Ursula von der Leyen said, Putin must lose. But it's not just what she says now, it's what she said before. It is what was being said in 2005 and 2010, what justified the coup d'etat against the democratically elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, in February 2014. As I said, that's when the war started. I mean, war did not start in 22. The war started in 14. And all of this is justified. It is distorted by the mainstream media
Mhm.
so that people accept it. That is where the major obstacle is to making any progress in reforming the United Nations. I may have made very concrete, implementable, pragmatic proposals how to reform the Security Council, how to reform the United Nations. But as long as the New York Times and the others continue lying to us, large swathes of the population are going to be disinformed, and my proposals will not fall on fertile ground.
Okay, thank you very much, there, Professor, as every time. So, to finish the event, I will give the floor to Gustavo Ng from Buenos Aires, Argentina. He's chief editor of the Dangdai magazine there. So he's not actually with us, but he sent us a video that we will put just right now on the floor. So you can put play.
I can't hear.
We can't listen the professor Gustavo. Maybe it's a technical problem that we can have actually. I don't know, maybe at the same time if in the
United States
Yes.
we listen
through
right.
CIA and FBI agencies, which we consider deep state apparatus, produce human rights entelechies to support the Latin American governments that represents their interests. I would like to present the case of the recent declassification of CIA and FBI documents that demonstrate their deep knowledge and direct involvement in the military dictatorship in Argentina from 1976 to 1983, the most brutal period of state terrorism in the history of that country, Argentina. The documents talk about the repressive coordination to assassinate opponents in different countries, proving the operation of the very well known by you Plan Condor, and reveal systematic criminal actions. Those in charge of declassifying the documents described as chilling both their content and volume of information that the US authorities received practically at the same time the events occurred. The declassification carried out on April 12, 2019 includes 43,000 pages of intelligence communications prepared basically by the CIA and FBI, and also by the Ministry of Defense and other organizations. They reveal testimonies and conversations held between senior officials of the two countries, which today should facilitate Argentine and international justice, how the system of decisions that produced the state's crimes functioned. They also served as a memory exercise in the historical reconstruction carried out by family members, researchers, journalists, and specialists in studies on human rights violations. Regarding the Plan Condor, a document dated on July 22nd, 1976, states that quoting, under the code name of Condor, several countries agreed to initiate operational actions in France with the objective of liquidating Latin American terrorists. A few months later, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger sent precise instructions to his ambassador in Buenos Aires through a secret telegram entitled Plan Condor. On August 23, 1976, Kissinger asks Ambassador Robert Hill to speak with Jorge Rafael Videla, the Argentine president, and tell him that the United States is prepared to exchange information about terrorist activity anywhere in the world. The secret telegram also contained instructions for its representations in Santiago de Chile, Asunción, La Paz, and Montevideo. Another repressive event that was reflected in a sequence of highly significant documents is the kidnapping of the relatives of the missing persons gathered in Buenos Aires on December 8, 1977. On the 12th of the same month, a cable arrived to the U.S. Embassy in Buenos Aires, issued from the State Department in Washington. It warned about the arrest of between 15 and 20 people gathered in Buenos Aires with the purpose of finding a method to obtain information about their missing relatives. The embassy responded by sending a list of people kidnapped in that place and in their homes in subsequent days. On December 19, R.J. Kelly, an official of the embassy in Buenos Aires, wrote a memorandum reporting that, quoting, the Navy, Argentine Navy, has the operational and intelligence capacity to have carried out the kidnappings, end of quote. A third case that I would like to present, revealed by the documents, is that of the kidnapping of two French nuns. On January 16, 1978, two intelligence officers hired by the Coca-Cola firm of Argentina pointed out to its president, Mr. Ornstein, that, quoting, his colleagues took the nuns because they are tired of moderate measures, and that the congregation to which they belong is left-wing, end of the quote. This was stated by the United States Consul, Goodwin Shapiro, writing a memorandum of the conversation he had with Ornstein during a lunch on the American Club. The intelligence officials also said that the nuns were kept in one of the detention places, was secret detention places of the Argentine Intelligence Secretariat. These documents must serve, as I said, the justice of Argentina, America, and the United Nations to clarify the state crimes committed with the consent of the CIA and the FBI that at the same time are making the industry of human rights. However, in front of the coming presidential elections in October in Argentina, these agencies are operating in favor of candidates who belong to the growing wave of far right in the Western world, which has manifested itself in Latin America, in the coup d'etat in Bolivia, the government of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, the prescriptions for presidency of Rafael Correa in Ecuador, Pedro Castillo in Peru, and Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner in Argentina, and the incessant siege of the government of Venezuela. The public manifestations of these operations are the explicit support of Donald Trump's main advisor during his presidency, Steve Bannon, for the candidate with the best prospect of the election, which is Javier Milei, and the powerful attack by a sector of the US Catholicism against Pope Francis. Thank you very much.
Thank you again to Gustavo for this video. It's really important what he mentioned in the historic context of Latin America, the Operation Condor, as one of the instruments of the United States to control the Western side of the world, with a very big repercussion in many issues and topics of all the continents on the world. So we are finished with this with all the panelists. I'm really happy to present this event, to collaborate in the organization of this important event, where we have the support of many people from here in Europe, Latin America, Asia, and they would give my thanks to all of you, and especially the Professor de Sayas, because we know that he's a really busy person. He's called from everywhere to give many conferences, but we know that he's every time here when we need of him, and this is something that we appreciate very, very, very much. So thank you again to all of you. I think that the Professor de Sayas will maybe conclude with something, so I will give you the floor for 2 minutes, because in Asia they have to sleep. So but in America, again in the morning, here we are in the afternoon. So I give you the floor.
Well, I've been an optimist all my life, and I don't give up. And I ask you, our listeners, our colleagues, our friends, not to give up. And I take a lot of inspiration from Jeff Sachs. He is the director of the Sustainable Development Project at Columbia University. He's been the personal advisor of 3 Secretary Generals on sustainable development. And he's written many fantastic books. Among them, this one that I just showed, The Price of Civilization, Economics and Ethics, which is missing all over. I mean, they use human rights as tools to attack others, but they forget that there's something called ethics, and there's something called morality. Now, notwithstanding the fact that the book got great reviews, and I thoroughly agree with them. First, let me just read from one review. Lucid, quietly urgent, and relentlessly logical. This is big thing with a capital B. And I agree, this is big thing. And so is The End of Poverty. And I decided to paraphrase Jeff in The End of Building a Just World Order, because I mean, I'm not a quitter, and I don't want anyone to say, forget it, you know, the Human Rights Council is no good anyhow, the United Nations is no good anyhow. Well, that's the only thing we have, huh? So what we have to do is to fix it. And again, I give a grim diagnosis, but I also give a prognosis, and I show how to fix it. So I hope that people do study the book and see the concrete proposals, and I'm convinced that they are implementable. What we need, of course, is political will. What we need is to move away from the lying and the suppression of information, et cetera, which has paralyzed civil society in all countries, not only in the United States, it paralyzes it in Latin America, in Africa, or in Asia. So how do I end my book? To echo the conclusion of Jeff Sachs in his book, The End of Poverty. Now, this is my language, not his, but I mean, the idea actually comes from him. Our endeavor must be to take those necessary steps one by one, so that future generations can say of our efforts that we sent forth mighty currents of hope, and that through patience and perseverance, we have made it possible to begin healing the world. And that's what we want to do. We have to heal the world. It's the only one we have. We want to start reconciliation. That's why I said a global compact on education is necessary, that we learn to live with each other. And we have a good document. We have a rules-based international order, and that is called the United Nations Charter. The problem is that my country of nationality, the United States of America, does not respect the UN Charter, notwithstanding whatever the New York Times and the Washington Post will tell you. I mean, we have to move away from this ridiculous concept that we are exceptional and that we have a mission for the rest of the world. It's not a mission. What we want is imperialism, just plain, naked, vulgar imperialism, a form of neocolonialism condemned, by the way, by the Human Rights Council in its landmark resolution 48/7, is the resolution on the sequels of colonialism and what that means today, and what responsibility exists on all states to make sure that sustainable justice is done. Not a band-aid here and a band-aid there. We have to make sure that we address the root causes of problems, and we propose to the world a healing mechanism, and we can do it. But we will not do it for as long as we are pessimistic, and for as long as we think that, oh no, we're only little people, we cannot do that. Well, in unity is force. And if your organization and organizations in India and in Indonesia and in China and throughout the world recognize that the priority must be peace, then if we achieve peace, we will have reconciliation. If we have achieved peace, we will be able to enjoy civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. I thank you all.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you there, Alfred, for that. Really, I hope that we will have the opportunity to listen you more, to have you maybe on the universities, on the basic schools, because I think that it's important to know the principles order of an international law, because this is the basis of the social contract, as mentioned Jean-Jacques Rousseau here in Geneva. And this is an inspiration to maybe create again a new social contract with the principle of the 25 international law. Thank you again to all of you to be present here. Thank you to all the speakers that decide to stay until this time in Asia, because we know that Saturday you prefer maybe sleeping and reset and not be here to give this important event. It means that you are really important in the fight of this on this human rights fight that we have to affront every day. So really thank you very much, and I wish you a really good day, really good evening, and we will in any case keep in touch for next meetings again. Thank you. Muchas gracias. Cuídense. Take care of you. Bye bye. Thank you. So, stop. Wow.